back in the garage, back in the garage, back in the garage today, back in the garage today. Alright guys, back in the garage today, getting ready to show you how to check the valves, and we'll see if we need to adjust them on a KTM 1290 Super Adventure. Alright, so with the spark plugs out of the front cylinder, next thing we want to do is remove these 4 bolts. That one's a little bit harder to see. That's going to allow the valve cover to come off, as well as the valve cover gasket. Be careful not to damage it when you remove the valve cover. Just a real quick heads up, these are 10mm bolts. Well, stuff like this is where these ratcheting style wrenches are worth their weight in gold. Alright, I got all 4 bolts taken off. Now we're going to pop this valve cover off. It came off rather easy. Just got to make sure that alright, gasket's still intact. And as you can see, the valve train is now exposed up here on the front cylinder. Now we're going to come back here to the rear cylinder, get this taken off, and then we'll go to checking the valves. It's going to be difficult to see back in here, but much like the front cylinder, we've got 4 screws we need to remove here on the rear cylinder. 10mm again, I'm going to use this little ratchet wrench, pull those off, and again, be careful not to harm the gasket. Alright, so the rear valve cover, not real easy to get off. I did end up taking off the little hose piece. There's a screw there that comes off, and then the hose is laying right here. This is the breather back to the fuel tank, but it is off of here, so now we can move on with our work. Alright, next up we're going to remove this screw on the alternator cover. It's I believe a 14mm hex. It's pretty easy to get out of there. Just FYI, there is an O-ring there. It may stick to the motor. Go ahead and pull it off. Put it on this plug for right now, that way you don't damage it. Alright, so you're going to use a 15mm socket. You're going to crank the motor counterclockwise. We're working on the rear cylinder first. Let me show you what we got. You guys might be able to see the mark there on the left. I'll put an arrow on the screen on the left gear. But there's a mark on this gear, there's a mark on this gear. You're going to crank the motor over, again, counterclockwise, until both of those marks are lined up across from each other. That means we're top dead center on the rear cylinder. If you got a buddy, have them come out and help you. I actually had Kristen come out, that way she can eyeball this as I'm turning the motor over. It'll be a little bit easier on the front cylinder because the gears are over on the side that we're going to be working on. But on this one, a little bit tougher. I wish I could show you these marks a little better. I'm going to try to zoom in. Let me see if I can shine some light on there. I tried to zoom in and get you guys a better shot. There's no way to get any better light in there. You're just gonna have to trust me. There's the little mark on this one is lined up across from the little mark on that one. You're gonna take out this 10mm screw, look back in there with your flashlight, make sure the notch from the crankshaft's lined up. Now there is a special tool you can get to hold it in place. I'm just gonna kind of chance it, and hopefully, you know, I'll just keep an eye on these as I'm checking the valves, and hopefully nothing moves. All right, so there are the valve clearance specs for my bike. Be sure to check your owner's manual. Yours may be a little bit different. Next thing you're going to need is a feeler gauge, because this is how we're going to check the valve clearance. Alright, so I'm going to start out on the exhaust valve back here. You saw the spec, it was 0.25mm to 0.30mm. This feeler gauge is a 0.254, so it kind of splits the difference. We're going to push it in between the camshaft and the cam lever. It's going to be a little hard for you guys to see because there's no way for me to get a camera down in there. But it does fit in between there. It's not loose. It's tightened up a little. But keep in mind, this one's just a little bit thicker than what the minimum is there. So let's go ahead and slide it here. And that one's good there too. So the good news is, at least on the rear cylinder, the exhaust valves are in spec. Now let's check the intake valves. You guys will have a much better view here of the intake, and it works the same as the exhaust. We're going to take our feeler gauge. We're going to push it down in between the camshaft and the cam lever, except this time they should be a good bit tighter because it calls for 0.10mm to 0.15mm. I have the skinniest. Oh wow, that slides right in. Check this one. Okay. Since the minimum thickness slid right in, I'm going to bump up to a 0.127, test it. Still good there. We'll go to the maximum here in just a second. This is a 0.15. A little tight on that side. A little bit better on that side. Everything's in spec though. Okay, this is just for demonstration purposes so you guys can see exactly what I'm doing. You're taking your feeler gauge and you're sliding it right in between there. Basically what you want to feel is pretend like you put a piece of paper inside of like a dictionary in the middle of it and you're going to pull that piece of paper back out. That's about what you should feel. Same thing over on this side here. Make sure you check both the intakes and the exhaust on the rear cylinder. Here's what the rear one checked for me. There's the intake numbers, there's the exhaust numbers. All right, so we're gonna do the same exact thing here on the front cylinder. We're gonna turn the motor counterclockwise and we're gonna line up these marks, and I should be able to get you a better picture of these marks, and they look exactly the way the ones on the rear do, so give you a little bit better of idea of what to look for. All right, so I'm gonna point arrows to the little marks there, but those are the marks you're looking for. Again, they'll look exactly the same on the rear cylinder that we just did, but now you can actually see both of them. You want to make sure they're lined up across from each other. Then we're going to come back over, check this again to make sure we see the notch in the crankshaft. If that's good to go, we can go ahead and start checking the valves here on the front cylinder. All right, so up here on the front cylinder, these valves right here are your intake valves. The valves down here on the bottom, oops, there we go, focus. The valves down here on the bottom are your exhaust valves. Same sort of deal, check to make sure they're within spec. I'm not gonna film this bottom part because I'm probably gonna have to twist my arm 90 million different ways in order to check these, but I have already checked the intake valves and they are in spec. Quick tip on checking that front exhaust valve there on the right. You might have to pull your feeler gauge off of the thing there, and you can get it, it's just a little bit of a pain in the butt. All right, so fortunately for me, all the valves are within spec, so I do not have to adjust them. Unfortunately for you, I'm not going to teach you how to adjust them until I need to adjust my own, so hopefully that's at least another 18,000 miles. But we do need to start reassembling the bike, and the first thing we're going to do is put this screw back in here, and then we're going to work our way on to the valve covers. All right, now that we got the valves all checked, we're going to go ahead and get the valve covers put back on. I'm going to start out with the rear one. All right, so the valve cover went on way easier than it came off. I don't have a torque wrench that can fit in there to torque these to spec. So just make sure you get them nice and tight. I still have this little connector piece I need to pop on here for the breather hose from the fuel tank, so I'm going to get that put on next. Just to show you how this works, this piece right here is going to pop into that spot right there, and then this piece kind of slides over it and holds it into place. You'll see the screw hole right there, and then last but not least, the little breather hose. All right, so now we can see we got this piece back on, got the little hose running up to here, valve covers back on. Next up, we're gonna reinsert this plug. Just make sure to tighten it back up good, and don't forget you do have an O-ring on the back of this. All right, next up, we're gonna put the valve cover back on the front cylinder and get everything tightened up here in a second. All right, we got the valve cover set down on there, and now we're just gonna put the 4 screws back in, or bolts back into the top of the valve cover. All right, you can see the valve cover's back on. Again, we're gonna start with that spark plug right there. All right, guys, so that's it. This weekend I managed to change the spark plugs, check the valve clearance, put the Rottweiler air intake on, get rid of all the emissions crap. Still got to change the oil and do a few other routine maintenance things to the bike, but all the big stuff is done. So I filmed a bunch of videos. We'll see how it all works out. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider hitting that subscribe button. If you got any questions about what you watched today, let me know in the comment section below. I will do my best to answer them. And as always, I'll talk to you again soon.